We now turn to sounds. Language is conveyed for the most part by the sounds that come out of our mouths. It may be conveyed by letters on the page, or in the case of Chinese, by characters. If you are a user of sign language, it can be conveyed by the movements you make with your hands and your face. But most human beings, through most of their history, have used speech sounds as the medium through which meaning is conveyed. Well, how do we make these sounds? What are they actually like? That's the business of the next few sessions. The study of speech sounds is called phonetics. That's the sub-discipline of linguistics that deals with speech sounds. Phonetics is of relatively long standing. People have been studying phonetics for quite a while, but it became very much a focus of attention at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. That's when phonetics as a subject came into its own. Basically, in phonetics, people study the production of speech sounds. How are they actually produced? What do you have to do with your face, with your lungs, with your tongue, in order to produce speech sounds? How are they perceived? What happens when those speech sounds made by others are perceived by a hearer? And how can we analyze speech sounds? These are basically the areas of phonetics. We're used to thinking of the form of a word as its spelling. We don't think very often that words are actually conveyed by sounds, but of course they are. Spelling is a secondary matter, and in order for us to focus on speech sounds, spelling is actually a good place to start because it makes us think about sounds in particular ways. Now, English is spelled using symbols that appear to represent sound. For example, the letter P looks as though it has something to do with the sound P. There are other ways of writing. For example, in Japanese, you write in signs which are the equivalent of a syllable. In Chinese, you write in characters, as you do in one form of Japanese, and these characters represent something like the meaning of the word rather than its sound. That means that all over China, everybody has the same writing system, even although at one end of China and the other people can't understand each other. They use different sounds. Written English is represented by graphic symbols which we call letters, and if you ask most English speakers who are literate how many letters there are, they say 26. And if you say, well, how many speech sounds are there in English, they're tempted also to say 26. That isn't in fact the case. As we'll see, spelling is a poor representative of sound. Well, how does this come about? Since we speak in sounds, what about spelling? Well, spelling doesn't accurately represent English speech sounds as they are now. There's a reason for that. English spelling was standardized a few centuries ago. Setting type, that is not writing longhand but using a printing press, started round about 1400. Spelling in English didn't get standardized until round about 1800, and it's still not quite standardized now. If you're using a word processor and you're using its spell checker, you have to tell it which kind of English you happen to be wanting it to check. American spelling is different from English spelling, but each of those is itself standardized, and that's been true for a few centuries. However, when English spelling was invented, it did represent much more the speech sounds of the time. Let's see how bad English is at representing speech sounds. First of all, let's look at how many sounds there are in particular words. Phil actually has three speech sounds, f, I, and L. There aren't two L's in fill, there's only one if you think of the sound. There may be four letters, but there are only three sounds. In feel, there are also normally only three sounds. The double E in the middle comes from an older period of English when, if we think of the letter E as representing the sound E as in bed, the word feel was pronounced fail, that is, a long E, two of them. The word tree still only has three sounds, four letters. The word bitter starts with a B, an I, and then one T sound, and then an I sound for me, and if you're in North America, an R sound comes after that. So, although in my spelling there is an R after the vowel, I don't actually pronounce it. Bitter, bitter. There's no R there, there's just an I sound. Thesis, the first two letters represent only one sound. The sound is th. Sing, the last two letters represent only one sound. The sound is ng. In drunk, D-R-U, and the N doesn't represent N, it represents ng, the same sound as in sing, and it's followed by a K. So at least in that word we have the same number of letters as we do sounds, although the letters don't necessarily represent the sounds very well. In single, the NG again represents ng, and then we get an L, and there's no E on the end. No one says singly, they just say single. The G is followed by an O. So what does this tell us? Well, it tells us spelling isn't very good. What about the E in keep? Any other words you can think of with that double E spelling that doesn't represent an E sound? What about O-U-G-H, as in rough and cough and though? Each of those sounds is different, but they're all spelt with O-U-G-H. So, what about silent letters? Well, there are a number of words which are spelled with letters that are not pronounced. The W in sword isn't pronounced. No one says sword, and no one says knecht, although they once did. Knecht was how that word was pronounced. The K was pronounced, and the Ch, the GH, was pronounced. In mortgage, the T is left out. In doubt, the B is left out, and so forth. In other cases, there's a sound that's in the word when it's said, which is not in the spelling. Use, if you look at the letters, should be usse. Well, it isn't. There's a y at the front and there's no e at the back. Cute starts with a K, spelled as a C, and then there's a y sound, cute, no e on the end. And one starts with a W, not one. One. Well, we can conclude that speech is definitely heard as sequences of sound. We're able to count them, and in each case we've been able to say there are 3 or 4 sounds in this word. Although the sounds run one into the other, we nevertheless hear them as sequences. And spelling certainly doesn't accurately represent the sequences we hear or the sequences we produce. The spelling is, if you like, old-fashioned. It represents an earlier form of the English language. If we were to design a new spelling system, we'd make it so much better. I often think it would be nice to have a big international conference on reforming English spelling. We'd all get together, linguists from all over the world. We'd all be paid by a nice wealthy organization, and we'd all meet in a large hotel, and we'd spend months arguing over how things were to be spelled. American delegates would say that their spelling should be this way, and English people would say, well, the English language is the English language, it's our language, and let's spell it our way. and people from Scotland would say, well, it doesn't sound like that to us. The way we say it is quite different. And after a considerable quarrelling, we'd all go home and there would be no resolution. We'd be left with the system as we now have it. But if we're going to do phonetics, we do need a system of symbols for representing the sounds that we hear. That's crucial, so we need a new alphabet, an alphabet which is phonetic. And that was what people thought towards the end of the 19th century, in the second half of the 19th century, and a number of people made up new alphabets to represent the actual sounds rather than spelling. And the one that has survived, along maybe with Pitman's shorthand, which is partly phonetic, is the International Phonetic Alphabet, otherwise known as the IPA, not the IPA, the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet. There's a committee that looks after this alphabet, updating it when needed, and what it aims to provide are the symbols for every speech sound used in every language in the world. Occasionally, people find a new language and there's a speech sound that they haven't seen used before, and so the IPA is updated. Not all languages use all of the sounds. There are some hundreds of possibilities within the IPA. Most languages use maybe between 25 or so and 100, and we'll have a look at the English ones in due course because that's the focus of attention for this particular part of the course.